cloudy, windy day, October 25th, 1994, which marked the end of a building, Eden's Theater in Northbrook. The wrecking ball was brought into position. Pounding began. First on the concrete canopy at the entrance. Then, on the roof tip above. With a profile like a seagull, Eden's Theater was only 33 years old. During its brief life, its beautiful shape and fine appointments had stirred the imagination and respect of the community. It was poised by the Eden's Highway, where all could see, and it was in step with the architectural style of Old Orchard and Eden's Plaza shopping centers. Its beauty was more than skin deep. Its acoustics and its movie projection facilities were the finest. But it was not to last. Motion picture theaters were changing with the times. Eden's Theater could not adjust to the times, and it sat on real estate that wanted to do other things. Eden's Theater had to go.
My name is Bruce Trins. I was a member of the original management team of the Eden's Theater, along with Robert and Howard Lubliner and Mike Stern. Robert Lubliner and Mike Stern operated the McClurg Theater, and Howard Lubliner and I operated the Clark Theater in downtown Chicago. Now, the Lubliners and I were descendants of the folks who had the original Lubliner and Trins theater chain in Chicago, which consisted of about 30 theaters. Mike Stern's father had a chain of theaters on the south side.
I'm an architect. Actually, I'm an architect in a large firm, Perkins & Well. Our offices are in Chicago, and we design schools, college and university buildings, commercial buildings, hospitals. In other words, we have a comprehensive kind of practice. And someplace along the line, we designed a very interesting theater, Eden's Theater. Now, I say interesting because actually most theaters are big shoeboxes. Most of them are built with the most ordinary kind of construction. And this one, however, due to an enlightened owner and entrepreneur, is a one-of-a-kind structure. It was really a true piece of architecture. The actual designer, the man with the big idea for this building, was Bob Palmer. Now, Bob Palmer was recognized in our office as a senior designer. In fact, after he designed the original Eden Theater, he was 5 or 6 years later the designer of the second Eden Theater, the circular building that was right next door to it. But Bob then also worked in Washington, D.C. for a few years, and at that point he had a change in his lifestyle. He moved to a small town in Colorado, became the mayor of the town, and has lived there happily ever since, and is not practicing architecture. But he was really responsible for the initial concept, which relied heavily on this unusual roof form, this what most people would call a saddle-like roof, what a structural engineer would call a hyperbolic paraboloid.
The reason we built at Northbrook was that we felt it was a kind of virgin area, and that the area could use a large, new, deluxe theater. Well, when we built the theater, when we started to plan, we knew that we had to have something that would look good from 360 degrees because the theater was visible from all sides. So it was up to the architects really to come up with something that would fit in that area. Bob Palmer, who was the project architect for Perkins and Will, came up with the idea of an oval building with the roof being a hyperbolic paraboloid. And we immediately fell in love with the idea, and it was a go at that time. When we were planning the theater, of course, it was our thought to have everything be state-of-the-art, the best sound, projection, the best seats, everything deluxe.
1,350 seats makes it a large auditorium, and when you have a large auditorium without any columns, you obviously need to have an ingenious structure to do it economically and quickly, and the hyperbolic paraboloid was thought to be an ideal, although unique, solution to the seating need here. But again, 1,350 seats makes it a large movie theater.
The roof was 159 foot wide between working points at the abutments and 221 foot long from tip to tip. To make matters more interesting, the roof was kept on an even keel, like I said, like a boat, so to speak, and the east tip was raised 10 feet, thus lowering the west tip 10 feet.
The dimensions of the concrete part of the roof structure was 222 feet from tip to tip, end to end, and 159 feet across.
The original Edens cost about $500,000, which in those days was a lot of money. Probably today, I imagine it would be close to $4 or $5 million to build a similar building. We were influenced by in our decision by a church in Milwaukee, which was a small building with a hyperbolic paraboloid as a roof. When we, as I said, when we saw that the idea of hyperbolic paraboloid, we just went for it, and everything else was out of the question.
I'd like to talk briefly about the fact that the whole structure sits on 2 points, like here and on the other side. And to keep it in balance, like if there's a snow load on one side only, a tie rod was installed from the high peak down to the ground, and a plunger with a piston up from the seats on the short side, or the low side of the roof, so that when the snow is on the side with the seats, the tie rod would keep it from tipping. When the snow is on the side with the tie rod, the plunger and the piston would keep it from tipping. This small model of 1/4 of the roof, the hyperbolic paraboloid roof, demonstrates clearly, I think, that the geometry of this curved surface, which if you look at it, is curving like this in this direction from this corner to that corner, and curving in this direction from this corner to that corner. In other words, two different curved surfaces generated by straight lines. This way and that way, this way and that way.
Eden's Theater 1 is a hyperbolic paraboloid, and as such is freestanding and really unable to be connected to any other addition. When the need arose for another theater to increase traffic in the area, the idea of an extension or an addition to Eden's 1 was out of the question. There's no way to really do it. So Eden's Theater 2 was built, and that is a round theater with a flat roof and a round canopy that has been inserted into a larger cylindrical body. And that too is a freestanding object. And they both work with sinewy curves, but they don't work together. They don't play off of each other. Eden's Theater 1 was built as an object in space, as a sculptural object. So it had difficulty connecting to any architecture around it. If you could imagine a later building project next to it, if you were to build an addition onto Eden's Theater 1, it would be almost impossible. Where do you begin? How can you begin to bring in other architecture to something that is so separate and freestanding? So Eden's Theater 2 was built as a separate building. It really had very little to do visually with Eden's Theater 1, even though it was the same plot of land, well, an adjacent plot of land, the same function, and so forth. So Eden's Theater 2 was built also as a freestanding object. It was given its own identity, separate from the very vertically graceful Eden's Theater 1.
The Edens had some deluxe and unique features. Just below the front tip at the front entrance was a graceful concrete canopy, like a series of umbrellas on flared posts, set on a curve along the entrance drive to provide initial shelter for those arriving by car. It too was light and graceful, even though made of reinforced concrete. It fit with the curves of the roof and the elliptical outline of the theater.
So when you think of the huge lobby of a building like this glowing at night with the light filtering through that gauzy fabric, it really would have been a marvelous thing to look at, especially when you think of that wonderful curved porte cochere in front with the recessed lights underneath their starburst coffer pattern on the underside of it. It would have been very impressive. A wonderful thing to have yourself dropped off as your husband parked the car, I assume, and you would get out of the car and then go. And it was all part of an arrival sequence. You know, it was very impressive, very, I don't want to say regal, but the idea of pulling your car around. First you passed by this architectural sign that announced what the building was. You came around, you approached the building at an angle, curved, and then you were enveloped by the porte cochere. You were then let out, and you went through the porte cochere, through the curtain wall, the glass curtain wall, into the lobby, the wonderfully lit lobby that curved up above you and went up to the prow that stuck out. And then you went off axis to get into the auditorium. And then as you entered the auditorium, there was a constriction as you went through the little double doors. And then the space explodes and you enter this enormous undulating room with the ceiling that comes down and then swoops back up with all of these gold curtains that then line the walls and the teak wood that's lining behind you and the in the balcony walls and so forth. It must have been an incredible feeling to arrive at this theater. The whole ceremony is there. The ceremony that was just as big a part of the pre-war movie palaces was in this theater. The interior was designed by Perkins & Will's Interior Division. The firm was so large that they had a separate division doing their interiors as opposed to their exteriors. So the interior of this building was designed specifically. A lot of people will remember the theater as it was shortly before it was torn down, with that hideous mural against one wall and, folding chairs where upholstered cast aluminum chairs used to be. So you really don't understand what it was when it was new, how impressive it was. And the paneling was teak. I mean, this was not a cheap operation here. And the upholstery was gold velvet. I mean, this was not gummy, sticky, gooey carpet that people will remember being there forever. This was very high quality. Well, I remember when it was torn down, the first thing they did was send a bobcat through the glass curtain wall, and so you could see those disgusting drapes flapping in the wind as sort of a reminder of how grungy the building was. But if you understand those drapes 30 years ago, they were beautiful, gauzy textiles that were hung, and they would screen the light as it came into the lobby, because the direct sun would enter that very high lobby and make it hot. Excuse me. So those curtains were a very elegant way of regulating the direct sunlight that came into the lobby. And when they were new, they were beautiful, because they would allow a delicate grid pattern of shadows to be cast on the carpeting and on the furnishings and so forth inside. And the beautiful, the draping effect of such a gossamer fabric was also very important, very impressive.
For years, the elaborate signs were as vivid as the day they were constructed, and they chronicled the popular movies of the day. The signs might have announced that the roof of Eden's Theater was the largest of its kind in the country, for it was true. Moreover, the concrete roof was remarkable for being only 4 inches thick, yet like an eggshell, it was quite strong because of its double curvature. The parking lot was laid out in large concentric circles, with the center being at the middle of the theater.
We were especially proud of our parking lot, which surrounded the theater and accommodated a lot of cars, but everyone was within walking distance of the front of the theater.
Now, a hyperbolic paraboloid, I've been referred to as the mentor of hyperbolic paraboloids. That's not quite true, but a hyperbolic paraboloid can be generated from a flat surface. Now, this is meant to be a flat surface, and that was about as good as I could do. But if you were to break this in the center, you could break it this way, or you could break it that way. The lines will remain straight because they are elastic. There will be no curved lines. This line is a little bit off right here, but we will bend this down around the corner here, and I will hold it up, and you will be able to see the curve. If the intersection of a line, a constant elevation line, with the surface around us is a hyperbola. Now, a hyperbola is a conic section. If you had a cone and you went down through the axis, you would get a conic section. The parabolic part of the hyperbolic paraboloid is this part right in here. That describes a parabola. And a parabola is a curve whose distance from a point to a line back here is a constant all the way along. And it is a natural form that any sort of a chain would take in holding up a structure. For example, a suspension bridge. is always, the curve is a parabola. And they can vary the stress in the cable by making the parabola steeper, or if they have to, making it this way. The stress increases as you flatten it out. Here is a much better model from which you can see this is the parabola again, and then we have a constant elevation come around here, the conic section, which is a hyperbola. Let me add one comment about a hyperbolic parabola. This theater had 1,309 seats. It was a big theater. And a hyperbolic parabola, if you had a screen at this end, for instance, there were no focal points for the sound to come up and come back down, causing echoes. And if the screen were here and the audience were out here, the angle was slight enough that the sound was in phase. And with the absence of echoes, the sound was reinforced, and the acoustics of that theater was really extraordinary. The wall system was a pre-stressed, precast concrete roof member, cut to fit underneath the edge here and to rest on its own foundation here. And because of the height of these points, I forget how high they were, but they were at least 35 feet high, I presume, or higher than that, that an ordinary brick wall would have to be horrendously massive because there were no intermediate floors or supports or that type of thing. So the roof slabs worked very well because they were strong in flexure and supplied all the strength we needed. Inside of the theater, you actually saw the bottom of the roof slab, which was painted. There was no ceilings or anything else inside the theater. The balcony was a step up in the back. And the projection booths were on the bottom of the balcony, or the end of the top?
Very top.
Very top, okay. And everything worked. It was, and the owner was really pleased with when he first moved in there.
Approximately 30 to 40 feet in from the tips of the building, we cast in some steel plates, which later received a vertical steel rod that ran down to the foundation wall. And there were four of these. Two of them came to a termination just at the balcony eyebrow in that area. And these steel rods had a diameter of, if I remember correctly, approximately 1.5 inches, and just shortly above the juncture at the wall, at the foundation wall and at the balcony, we had these large hydraulic cylinders that were attached to these rods, so that during windy conditions, since the exterior walls of the structure were designed to permit the shell to move during wind, there was actually vertical movement in these cylinders. On one end of the theater, depending on the wind conditions, the hydraulic cylinders would stretch out to permit the shell to go up a little bit, but not too much. And then on the other end, they would be compressed so as to keep that vertical movement to a minimum. And I kind of recall after the theater opened, for the first couple of months during times of high winds, at about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the evening, my phone would ring, and occasionally I'd go over there to satisfy the projectionist that the noises he heard from within the wall, where the hydraulic cylinders were in fact things that we had anticipated, and he could feel comfortable that he heard those noises. After a couple of months, he was satisfied, and this call ceased.
It then became the job of the general contractor to actually construct the theater. Some of the main tasks were to build a forest of supports to hold up the roof slab forms, to install the plywood forms with double curvatures, to actually pour or place concrete up both sides at once. To do this required 4 tall lifting cranes. Then let the concrete rest undisturbed for 28 days. Let's hear what all this involved.
Okay, this is a photograph of the completed structure before the enclosing walls are put up. Now, the enclosing walls keep the cold air out, keep the wind and rain out and the birds out of the building, but they're not structural. The walls are not structural. In this building, this is the structure, this great bird-like form. And that set a world's record, as this is again called the hyperbolic paraboloid. It was the world's largest concrete roof of this type. The next picture shows the enclosing walls in place. So you can see the triangular kind of roof here, and the enclosing walls, which are not holding up the roof, just a matter of keeping the weather out, and stray dogs and cats and birds. This shows the completed building.
We had never built a building such as Eden's Theater before, so we didn't know really what were proper plans and specifications. And my job really was an interpretive job, and my function was to see that the proper people were at the construction site at the proper time so that things would harmonize and go along as they were supposed to, because building repair due to construction failures is extremely important, is extremely expensive, and cannot be tolerated in the normal course of events. And there are several examples of building failures in Chicago, which I won't go into, but Chicago abounds with building failures. Our object was to avoid any type of failure, if possible. So therefore, the firm lived up to its reputation of listening to the contractor and talking to the contractor. The contractor always had someone to talk to ask a question, and hopefully get an answer. And that was my role. The drawings weren't perfect, but the thing I learned at that stage in my career, no set of drawings are perfect. And this was an extremely complicated structure. You had one chance to do it correctly, and to economize on the expression of information would have been just a disaster.
I made a decision that prior to the framing of the hyperbolic paraboloid itself, that we'd undertake the casting of the balcony, and we would therefore not have to involve ourselves in the placement of concrete under this huge roof at some future date. It also meant that the supports for the roof shell would ultimately have to be supported on that balcony, which was checked into and found to be substantial and able to carry those loads, since those loads were relatively light. The framing of the balcony was a very laborious undertaking. The framing of the balcony was at least as difficult, if not more challenging, than the framing of the shell, because there were so many finite details associated with the angular framing that was to be undertaken. I was delighted when that particular structure was completed. From there we went on, of course, to the only remaining, the biggest challenge was the shell itself, and it was the requirement of the project specifications that that portion of the hyperbolic paraboloid, including the abutments, the two supports, were to be cast monolithically, meaning that you could not say, today I'll pour a couple hundred yards of concrete, or place a couple hundred yards of concrete and come back a week later and place some more. Everything had to be fluid, plastic, and placed and finished on within a given continuing period of time. which meant a tremendous amount of framing material, plywood, centering. Centering is the steel tubular scaffolds you may have seen in some slides here. That material was of a magnitude that we started to receive shipments directly from the manufacturer of the scaffolding in Pennsylvania. I'd get on the phone and just say, send me a freight car load of scaffold frames, and what size do you want? I'd say, it does not matter. It's just get them out here.
The requirement that Paul referred to, where he had to pour this as a continuous structure, is contained in one small note on the drawings. And if somebody didn't see that note, maybe the world would be different now, but the note says, it is required that the abutment, shell, and edge members be poured continuously in one pour, starting at elevation and so forth and so on. And it concludes, at no time shall the edge of the pour be allowed to set before adjacent concrete is placed. That is one small note on the structural drawings which affected everything that was done on this particular project. I had a flashback. Since the roof had, I think, 550 yards of concrete.
I think so, yes.
Yes. Yeah, Mr. Hillestead scheduled the massive roof pour with the edge members to start at midnight. And they had it looked like a movie set. They had big Klieg lights, and they had people directing trucks, and they had people saying, up there, that's where the concrete goes. And they worked, they finished about 8 o'clock in the evening the following day, so that they put in 20 hours pouring the rock.
Above and beyond the planning and design concepts, the architectural and engineering features, and the construction work, there's one thing which stands out. Eden's Theater had a distinct architectural style. This was a beautiful style, which is best explained by one who has the appropriate talent, training, and insight.
To understand why this building is important, you have to understand why it's unlike a style that was popular at that time called modernism. And it gained popularity in this country mainly after the Second World War. It was based on really the architectural theories of three architects in Europe: Le Corbusier, Walter Gropius, and Mies van der Rohe. And Mies van der Rohe emigrated to this country and took a position as the head of IIT, the Illinois Institute of Technology. And so his brand of modernism, very geometric, very plain, well, to our eyes, plain but elegant, beautiful materials, marble and so forth, very, no ornament at all, very stripped down and very elegant. His brand, that kind of modernism, really took off in this country, and Chicago especially. So you get things like the IIT campus, or the Dirksen Center, or the IBM building in the Loop. Things that we would now refer to as glass boxes. But this was very important at the time, and there were other architectural firms that quickly picked up this type of style, one of those being Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, where their main office was based in Chicago, and they had a very powerful influence in this kind of architecture. They produced buildings like the Sears Tower, the John Hancock Building, real icons of modernism, corporate modernism, because this was taken up by large corporations as their sort of identity, their architectural identity. Well, in the 1950s, other architects began to stretch the boundaries of modernism. They began to create more interesting forms, but still within that very simple, elegant context. Architects like Oscar Niemeyer from Brazil, and even Le Corbusier himself, one of the fathers of modernism, began to play with the forms, make them very organic, very curved, began to play with the structure of a building, making that expressive of what the building, make that expressive of the essence of the building. So you get marvelous masterpieces that are still within this modernist realm, but very sculptural, very elegant. And that type of free-form modernism is really what the Eden Theater is about too, in my opinion. At the same time, there was a cultural style that was big in the 1950s. Thomas Hein has described it as populux, sort of the boomerang starburst style that swept the country. You could understand it in terms of automobile design with rockets and tail fins and so forth. And that had a very forward-looking attitude to it. And it also used sinuous curves and angles, jagged angles and lines and so forth, bright colors. And that populux curve, that appeal that it had, the forward-looking design and so forth, really went with that free-form modernism that the high-style architects were going after. So the Eden Theater is a bit of both. It's a bit of that high-style, free-form modernism, but in a context where you could say it was very popular. It's a movie theater, an entertainment palace, so to speak. So it was also part of the cultural experience at the same time. And that's a very interesting point about this building. You don't always get that high style in addition to cultural popularity at the same time in one building. And I think that's a very important thing to remember about the architecture here. Well, the location of the theater is also very important. Needless to say, it's in the northwest suburbs. Okay. Well, it's a suburban location. It is not an urban project. It is not urban infill. So the project doesn't have to be about the frontage, the street frontage, like the Granada Theater or the Chicago Theater, where a lot of those buildings had to do with just that one plane where it met the street, and of course the huge marquee that hung off the front of the building. Those older theaters, the pre-war theaters, were about that, what was along the street to get people to come into the building. Well, the Eden Theater is a suburban site. It had no street frontage where it had buildings to relate to on either side, so it could be a sculptural object. It could be an object in space to be viewed from any angle. And in fact, it was situated within its site so that the Eden's Expressway would be on one side, the Skokie Valley Highway would be on the other, and then the expressway spur would be on a third side, so that it was surrounded by automobile traffic. So the building was able to capture the eye from the eyes of the motorists from any angle. It was almost, it seems like it would be a sort of what's the word here? That it would be able to capture the eye would be, I think, very important programmatically to the building. So I think that the form, the architecture, in this case, is very tied to the selling of the building itself, the selling of the function, I should say. It was very unusual, very eye-catching. Well, there are two other, I think, important commercial projects along the Eden's Expressway, and the Eden's Theater is sort of the northernmost. The other two are Old Orchard Shopping Center, designed in 1956 by a very prominent Chicago architecture firm, Lobel, Schlossman & Bennett. And the other one is Eden's Plaza, by the firm of Graham Anderson, Probst & White of 1956 as well. And Graham Anderson, Probst & White were behind buildings such as the Merchandise Mart and the Wrigley Building. So really both firms were very tied to the architectural heritage in Chicago. And both projects were wonderful examples of modernism. 1950s, strict modernism, very elegant. And both projects have been desecrated with new additions and changes and redesigns and so forth. The landscaping of Old Orchard Shopping Center was by Lawrence Halprin, a very, very important landscape architect. And most recently, they've made additions and parking garage additions and so forth, and really changed the entire character of the mall into one of sort of an English garden-looking thing with white lattice work everywhere and Victorian scrolls and so forth, which is not at all the identity that the mall had originally. It has lost a lot of what made the mall architecturally important to begin with. Eden's Plaza has been recently encased in a postmodern redesign of brick and plastic columns and so forth, and it has lost its identity as well. It's wonderfully elegant Miesian modernism with white bricks and black metal columns and so forth. And the interior of Carson's, there was a wonderful a rotunda with great sweeping curves and so forth, and that has been completely removed and the rotunda filled in. So those two other monuments on the Edens Expressway have been changed beyond recognition and really have lost much of their architectural significance. And of course the Edens Theater, as we all know, doesn't even exist anymore. And it hasn't been changed so much as completely erased. And that's very unfortunate. We've lost a lot of the post-war architectural heritage, and we can't get that back. There's no way to restore these monuments that have been so drastically changed, let alone ones that have been demolished. The ones that have been changed are equally as irretrievable.
Edens 1 has left fond memories with many theatergoers. We have time to get the viewpoints of a few of them, such as Charlie Beinlich at his restaurant across the street.
When they first opened, they would park down the road, up the road, fill our parking lot. It was just unbelievable.
We were delighted to find a theater of that quality in our new hometown, particularly because my husband and I had always been great movie fans. Going to the Edens Theater was like going to a large movie palace, like the Oriental Theater in Chicago or the Chicago Theater, which is now used for shows but was once a movie theater. You felt like you were having a real experience.
The Edens, as I recall, did not have the panoramic screen. It didn't have Dolby sound or Sensurround. Those were non-existent when it was built. I don't know that it was upgraded necessarily. It may have been at one time, but the feeling that I got in that theater was that I was actually not in the movie as a participant, but I was in the movie.
It was a great venue for the showing of such big screen extravaganzas as Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the Star Wars trilogy, and E.T. And I can remember very well going there to see Gone with the Wind when it was re-released after many, many years, and taking a young daughter for her first experience with that blockbuster show. When you saw Gone with the Wind at the Edens Theater, you experienced the sound, you experienced the great big picture all over the screen in front of you. You had an experience with the great crowd of people there who were appreciating a really good movie in a good location.
I remember seeing Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and it came to life. Be that it was not necessarily that historically accurate, didn't matter, because Westerns were long gone by that time, and we were getting into the age of the science fiction films, and I did see 2001: A Space Odyssey there, and there was no finer venue for that. It was absolutely the finest theater for that movie that I can think of.
Yeah, the Loveliners were very nice fellows. They explained to us about the building, and they said that if the movie didn't go, they were going to have live entertainment in there, and they had a stage in there that would take care of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. It was that large, but it never matured. They never went for live entertainment. I don't know why, because I think it would have been successful out here.
Another aspect of the theater that was very nice was the spacious lobby and the fact that they did have art shows in the lobby And while you were waiting for a show to begin, you could go there and comment and enjoy the art that they were displaying at that time.
I wonder sometimes how many hours I spent at the Edens. I hope that it was enough, but I'm not really sure.
Movie-going has changed now, just like so many things in our society. I don't think we're going to have big movie palaces, big show houses for movies like the Edens Theater. It was really the modern equivalent of the old-style palaces, and now we're talking about smaller and smaller movie theaters. Great clusters of them, but not anything with the 1,300 and some seats that you had at the Edens Theater. Not any of them with the classy decor that you had at that theater, and probably not with the big full sound system that you had at Edens 1. We miss it now, and we'll probably never see anything quite like it again.
Yes, the Edens is gone. In its place, another shopping center. The questions remain. What brought on the demise? Why was such a fine theater demolished? The demise of the Edens Theater, as hard as it may be to understand, was just a ripple in the waves of change that have washed over the buildings in our metropolitan area. Many fine and imposing structures have been casually destroyed to make way for others. Taken by itself, it's difficult to understand why a well-built building must be torn down. But on standing back and viewing the larger picture, one finds that hundreds and thousands of major buildings in the metropolitan area have come and gone. The whole appearance of a business district can change in 1 or 2 generations, and indeed, this has happened. The records are there. A number of well-illustrated books of Chicagoland buildings show the story of many, many structures which have come and gone.
Changed anything. It looks like the curtains, the drapes, the upholstery of the seats, the carpets were all exactly as they had been in 1963 when the building opened 62. So it was a modern version of demolition by neglect. The building became a white elephant.
Edens 1, they knocked off the western point, and they took out the balcony and then the entranceway. And there was two main supports on the north side and the south side. And when they cracked that support, the roof just cracked in half and fell into where the seats were. Unfortunately, I wasn't here when that happened. It was in between lunch and dinner. And I came back, everything came to a halt. And all the guys just were running around checking to see who was where, make sure all the crew was okay. And usually they were pretty neat when they shut down for the night, but they just left everything where it was and went home.
Part about it was that they let it go. Everybody that got into it after the Lubliners left the theater, they sold it, and whoever was in there just let it go, just kept raking off the top, and just kept raising the prices, and done nothing, absolutely nothing. The parking lot was so bad, and they had at one time they had like 30 Northbrook, 30 or 40 violations, and I'm surprised that they hadn't. The village didn't close it up. They should have closed it up. The seats were all torn, and it was just bad news. Air conditioning wasn't working right, and finally it just got to a point where this Canadian outfit bought it. I guess that was the last one that had it. So that was a shame because, yeah, I think it could still be here today.
That it defied subdivision, really. And the architecture that made it so interesting and so wonderful prohibited it from making money today when smaller theaters are necessary to be lucrative. So really, that's also very interesting. The reason why it's memorable is the reason why it was demolished.